They said the cemetery bells of Manila had not rung in decades. Yet sometimes, when the sky turned the color of rust and the air grew heavy with the scent of rain, people claimed they could hear them again, soft, distant, like a warning whispered through time. I didn't believe in any of that when I first arrived. I was a journalist, 27, with more curiosity than sense. My editor had sent me to write about urban legends of the Philippines, a harmless Halloween feature, the kind that gets clicks but doesn't require much effort. But when I mentioned the bells of Manila in conversation, every local fell silent. One woman even crossed herself before muttering, "They ring only for the lost." The cemetery was in the northern district, old, forgotten, half swallowed by the city's sprawl. The gates were rusted, vines tangled around the iron bars like hands trying to keep something from escaping. When I arrived, the sun was setting behind the mausoleums, casting long shadows that looked alive. There was a man sitting by the entrance, a caretaker maybe, smoking a thin cigar. His face was wrinkled like paper left in the rain. "Looking for someone?" he asked, voice low, suspicious. I smiled, flashing my press badge. "Just here to write about the bells. You know, the legend?" He exhaled a long line of smoke and said, "There are no bells here anymore, sir. They were taken down after the incident." He didn't explain what incident, and when I asked, he only looked toward the church in the center of the graveyard, its tower half collapsed, but the bronze outline of a bell still visible through the ruin. The air felt heavier the closer I walked to that church. The silence was complete. Not even crickets dared to sing. Then I saw it. A bell rope, old and frayed, dangling from a hole in the roof, swaying gently as if someone had just pulled it. But the air was still. There was no wind. When I turned to ask the caretaker about it, he was gone. Only the faint echo of footsteps, or maybe the suggestion of them, remained. I told myself it was just nerves. That night, I decided to stay in a nearby hostel. But at midnight, as I lay in bed half asleep, I heard something faint, metallic, rhythmic. Ding, pause, ding, pause, ding. 3 slow chimes, coming from the direction of the cemetery. The next morning, I returned to the cemetery. I told myself it was just my imagination, the sound of a distant church maybe, or a dream that followed me into waking. But the unease wouldn't leave me. It clung to my skin like humidity, whispering go back even as my feet kept walking forward. The caretaker was there again, sweeping leaves near the gates as if he'd never moved at all. When he saw me, he frowned, as though expecting bad news. "You heard them, didn't you?" he said quietly. I didn't answer. His eyes softened with pity. "You shouldn't have stayed so close. The bells remember who listens." He finally told me the story. Decades ago, before Manila became the city of glass and neon it is now, that cemetery was part of a small church parish. The bell tower stood tall then, shining bronze against the sun. The priest, Father Santillan, was loved by the townsfolk. He blessed the dead, buried the poor for free, and said the bells would always ring to guide lost souls home. But one stormy night, something changed. A group of grave robbers tried to steal the offerings left by families for their dead, jewelry, trinkets, even bones believed to hold luck. The priest confronted them inside the chapel. No one knows exactly what happened, only that lightning struck the tower moments later, and the bells rang louder than ever before, until the roof collapsed. When the townsfolk came to search the ruins, they found the robbers, their faces pale, eyes wide open, as if they'd seen something unspeakable. And Father Santillan was gone. Only his rosary remained, tangled in the bell rope still warm. From that day on, the bells would sometimes ring by themselves at midnight. Slow, deliberate tolls that echoed through the fog. Each time they did, someone in the neighborhood died before sunrise. The government eventually sealed off the place. The bells were removed, melted down, or so they said, but the locals insisted the sound still traveled through the air, not made of metal anymore, but memory, a cursed echo. As the caretaker finished the story, he looked toward the old chapel again. "The dead here do not rest easily," he murmured. "They listen for the bells because that's the only way they know they're still remembered." He told me to leave the city, or at least to stay away at night. I thanked him, but inside, I already knew I wouldn't listen. A story like that, it demanded proof. It demanded to be seen. So I made a plan. I would return at midnight, recorder in hand, and capture the bells for myself. As I walked away, I could swear I heard something faint again. Not ringing this time, but breathing, like the sound of metal sighing deep underground. The city was quieter than usual that night. Even the traffic seemed to fade as I walked through the narrow streets toward the cemetery. A thin mist rolled over the ground, carrying the scent of rain and rust. In my backpack, my recorder blinked with a small red light. Ready. I told myself it was just work, documentation, facts. But my hands wouldn't stop trembling. By the time I reached the gates, the moon was veiled behind clouds. The cemetery looked even older in the dim light, as if time itself had stepped back a century. The caretaker was nowhere to be seen this time. Only the gate, slightly open, creaking like a warning. I slipped inside. The air was cold, unnaturally so. I could see my breath drift through the mist. Every tombstone seemed to lean a little closer, their carvings eroded into unreadable names. As I walked toward the chapel, I turned on my recorder. "November 2nd, I whispered into the mic. "Cemetery of Santa Clara, Manila. Midnight observation. Objective. Record possible bell sounds reported by locals." The sound of my own voice comforted me, if only slightly. But soon, even that small safety began to erode. Somewhere deep among the graves, I heard movement, a soft shuffle, like fabric dragging over stone. When I shone my flashlight in that direction, there was nothing, only fog. The chapel loomed ahead, its roof half collapsed, the door hanging from one hinge. I stepped inside. Dust. Silence. The faint scent of candle wax that shouldn't have been there. And in the center, the bell rope, still swaying slowly, though I hadn't touched it. I set my recorder on the ground and aimed the mic upward toward the bell tower. Then I waited. 1 minute, 5 minutes, 10. Nothing. Only the sound of my own heartbeat, loud and uneven. I was about to stop the recording when I felt it, a vibration through the floor. Soft at first, like the hum of a train miles away. Then stronger. And then, the sound came. Ding. Pause. Ding. Pause. Ding. The same rhythm as before. Each toll slow and heavy, echoing through the night like a heartbeat beneath the earth. The rope trembled violently now, though no wind stirred. I stared up at the darkness above, at the hollow where the bell should have been. There was nothing there, no metal, no shape. And yet, the sound was real. I took a step back. That's when my recorder's red light began to flicker, erratic. The air around me felt electric, charged with something unseen. And from somewhere deep inside the chapel, beneath the floorboards perhaps, came another sound. Not a bell this time, a whisper. A voice, low and desperate, saying just one word. "Remember." The recorder cut off, and the bells rang again, louder, faster, like a storm breaking loose. The sound of the bells faded as suddenly as it had begun. The silence that followed was even worse, thick, almost physical, pressing against my ears until I could hear my pulse pounding in my skull. I knelt to grab the recorder, but it was cold, impossibly cold, like it had been sitting inside a freezer. The battery light was dead. I whispered into the dark, "Who's there?" Nothing. Then again, closer this time. "Remember." It didn't echo. It vibrated, like the earth itself was whispering. I aimed my flashlight downward, and that's when I saw it. Cracks in the chapel floor, thin but fresh, cutting across the old tiles like veins. A soft dust rose from them, and in that dust, faint impressions, as though fingers had brushed the surface from underneath. I stepped back, every instinct screaming at me to leave. But curiosity, or maybe something stronger, held me there. The caretaker's words came back to me. They ring only for the lost. What if it wasn't just a legend? What if the bells were a signal? Not for the living, but for those who still wandered between worlds. I crouched near the largest crack, trying to listen. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, faintly, the sound of breathing. Ragged. Human. I stood up fast, heart hammering. There was no one there. The door behind me was still ajar, showing only the fog outside. Thick now, like a white wall. That's when I saw a shape move across the fog. Slow, dragging one leg behind the other. It stopped near the chapel entrance but didn't come in. The outline looked almost human. Almost. It tilted its head slightly as though listening. Then I realized the sound of breathing I'd heard wasn't mine. The air grew colder still. The rope began to move again, swaying side to side in perfect rhythm with the unseen figure outside. Each movement made a soft creak, the sound of tension, of weight, as if something invisible was pulling from above. My body felt frozen. I couldn't run. I couldn't even breathe. The only thing I could do was whisper, almost pleading, "Who are you?" And then, for the first time, it answered. The voice came from below, muffled and old, filled with sorrow rather than threat. "Find him." The rope stopped moving. The shape in the fog disappeared, and somewhere far away another bell began to ring, fainter, as if calling from miles beneath the earth. I didn't sleep that night. Back at the hostel, I kept staring at the recorder, lifeless, cracked, yet somehow still holding the memory of those words. Find him. I replayed the caretaker's story in my mind, the priest who vanished, the robbers who died with fear in their eyes. If him meant Father Santillan, then maybe he hadn't vanished at all. Maybe he was still there, waiting beneath the ground that bore his name. The next morning, I went to the city archives. The clerk looked at me strangely when I asked for burial records from the old cemetery. "Most of those were destroyed," she said, typing slowly. "But you're lucky. There's a surviving register from the 1950s. The paper was yellowed and fragile. The ink almost faded away. I scanned line after line until I found it. Reverse Father Rafael Santillan, 1952, declared missing. But right beneath it, in smaller handwriting, almost as if added later, was another note. Memorial plot unmarked. No ceremony performed. That was it. No coordinates, no clues. But it was enough. By dusk, I was back at the cemetery, shovel in hand. I told myself I wasn't there to dig, only to look. But as I walked through the rows of graves, something strange happened. Every time I passed a certain section near the chapel, my flashlight flickered. Once, twice, always at the same spot. And beneath that patch of grass was a single headstone broken in two, its name worn away completely. It faced the chapel, directly toward the bell tower. I knelt, brushing the dirt aside. The ground was uneven, and beneath the cracked stone, I saw a glimpse of metal, rusted and green but unmistakable. A small bronze plaque. The inscription read, "Here lies the one who guided the lost." The caretaker's story echoed in my mind. The bells would ring to guide lost souls home? If this was the priest's grave, then maybe the bells weren't cursed at all. Maybe they were calling for help, trying to finish a duty left undone. A cold wind swept through the cemetery, carrying a faint, almost melodic hum. For a second, I thought it was just the breeze through the trees, until the tone deepened into a single low note. A bell. But softer now, sadder. As if it wasn't warning me anymore, but asking for peace. I whispered into the dark. I found him. And just like that, the wind stopped. The silence returned, absolute and clean, like the world itself was holding its breath. Then, faintly, I heard a voice. Not from the ground this time, but right behind me. "Then set me free." I froze. The voice behind me was calm. Not threatening, not angry, just tired. The way someone sounds after waiting too long to be heard. I turned around slowly. The fog had thickened again, silver under the moonlight, swirling between the tombstones like smoke from invisible candles. And there, standing where the broken gate should have been, was a figure in a priest's robe. He wasn't glowing, he wasn't monstrous, he just was. A shape carved from the night itself, edges soft and uncertain. His hands were clasped in front of him, as if still holding a rosary that no longer existed. I wanted to run, to scream, to do anything but stand there. Yet something in his eyes, or where his eyes should have been, held me in place. There was sorrow in that gaze, endless sorrow. "You were Father Santillan," I whispered. He nodded once. His lips moved, but no sound came. Then, faintly, I heard it again. The soft vibration beneath my feet, the sound of metal awakening. The bells. Except now it wasn't the 3 tolls of warning. It was a melody, low, steady, and almost beautiful. The kind of sound that makes you think of open doors and final goodbyes. The air shimmered around him as if the sound itself was loosening his shape. And then I understood. He wasn't haunting this place. He was bound to it. The bells were his anchor, his unfinished prayer. I took a step closer and said, "They melted your bells, didn't they?" He shook his head slowly, pointing toward the chapel. And that's when I saw it. Hidden among the weeds near the ruins, a small bronze fragment glinting under the moonlight. It wasn't melted, it was broken, half buried in the soil, like it had been trying to rise back to the surface. I picked it up. It was heavy, colder than stone. Etched faintly across it were words in Latin, Lux in tenebris lucet. The light shines in the darkness. The moment I spoke those words aloud, the bells rang one last time. But this time, they were not just in my ears. They were everywhere, in the ground, in the air, in my chest. A resonance that felt like release. When I opened my eyes again, the fog was gone. The figure, too. Only the cemetery remained, quiet and still beneath the dawn's first light. The caretaker found me there hours later, sitting near the broken grave. He didn't ask what had happened. He just nodded, as if he already knew. "The bells won't ring again," he said softly. "He's home now." I left Manila the next day, recorder still silent, the file corrupted beyond repair. But sometimes, when rain falls on metal rooftops or wind passes through an empty alley, I swear I can still hear it. One last bell, soft, gentle, and at peace.